This method is called a slump or a hump method, and I'll show you the difference between the two. We're gonna actually start with the hump method, and I'm gonna use a paper bowl. You have one of these in your art kit. And I like using paper forms because the moisture will go into the form a little bit and it'll dry, and it's very easy to take them out when they start to shrink. The clay will come off the bowl very soon after we drape it. We're gonna let it sit for a little while because when the clay is gonna go over top or humped over the form, it will try to shrink and it will crack if we leave it too long. So we want to pop it out and take it off the form as soon as it's really holding shape. So I rolled out this piece of slab, and it's a pretty thin piece. It's less than 1/4 of an inch, and I like to make things a little thinner. Sometimes they fall apart, so you have that fine line between making it thin enough but not too thin. And you can play with it. Make it 1/4 of an inch or thinner. And then what you're gonna do is put your form down, and you're gonna take your piece of clay and put it over top of the form, whatever form you're choosing. And you're gonna kind of stretch it and push it so that it will take exactly to the same shape of the piece underneath. Okay, and again, I like my paddle. I can go and paddle it and then kind of encourage the clay to fall around the edges of the bowl. And then what you're gonna wanna do pretty soon is make sure that you cut out around it, but be generous, give yourself a lot of space. You don't wanna cut too close. I have a fold happening here, so I'll try to fix that. So I'm just kind of pressing the clay around so it will go to the edges of the bowl. And I'm kind of pushing it down and out and stretching it a little bit. And this fold is just gonna happen, so I'm gonna work with it a little bit. And I'll maybe put some, I'll fix it a little bit later. But I'm just gonna press this clay and stretch it to the edges of the paper bowl. And these are very easy to do. You can make a lot of the same things. So if you wanted to make a set of 2 or 3 bowls or 4 bowls and, you know, paint them differently or glaze them to complement each other to make a nice grouping of some functional pieces, then these are very quick. And you can maybe not spend your time on making the piece, but actually decorating the piece. And that's what we're calling surface decoration. So I'm gonna go in a little closer, and then I'm gonna let this firm up, and then I will show you how we're going to finish the edge and take it out. So that'll sit and firm up. And then I will show you the next tutorial on the opposite, which is the inside of the bowl. Now the second part of the slump hump that I'm gonna show you is the slump. And the slump means it's gonna go down inside the form. And I'm using a deep dish paper plate, paper bowl. So it'll hold, it'll have nice sides to it. And this is almost like making, as if you were making a pie. You would roll out your dough, your big slab of dough, and then you would take this dough and go over top and then put it on top of, if you had a pie plate, you would do that. And you're gonna try to work the clay. It needs to be thin enough that you can actually get it kind of down in there. You're gonna work the clay down into the form. In this case, it's a deep plate. I don't want it to crack. It's cracking a little bit. But I'm gonna kind of lift up my slab and kind of let it fall in there. All right. And again, it's paper, so I don't have to put any plastic in there because this clay is not going to stick to the paper. The moisture is going to absorb into the paper plate, and my clay body is going to start to shrink, and it's going to pull away from the sides. So the best thing about this one is you don't have to worry about how long you leave this clay inside this plate, because you're always going to be able to get it out, and it's going to shrink away from the sides, and it will not crack as it's shrinking because it's on the inside. So if you want to have instant success, this is probably the easier of the two Slump Hump forms. But again, a very easy way to make a quick piece, and you can make them all the same size and the same shape. So I'm going to take my sponge and some water and just kind of go over some of these cracks. They're all surface cracks, and I'm going to just kind of smooth out where I have a lot of my fingerprints in here. Again, I like the sponge, it's easy to smooth, and it's not going to create more holes. The ribs are okay, but you have to be really careful if you're using a metal or a wooden rib, because they're not as flexible as a sponge. Okay, so I'm really getting this worked in here. And there's a lot of excess, so I'm going to cut away most of the excess for now, and then I'm going to come back later and really fix my edges. So you don't want to wait until it's too dry to come back and fix those edges, or they're going to be very sharp and jagged. So I'm going to take my needle tool, and I'm going to kind of go around. I can actually see if I can come close to the form and then outline it. And as you can see, I'm making a very, very jagged edge. So I don't want that to be my finished final edge. I want to come back and fix that. And if you have a knife or an X-Acto knife, you can use that. So what I'm going to do is let this sit for a little bit, and then I'm going to come back and really fix these edges with some saran wrap and a sponge, and I'm going to decide how I want the edges to look. And I'm even going to think about maybe adding a design or a texture to the outside also, because this would be a really nice place to put some designs. You can stamp in some different, any different textures that you might have lying around. You can put a shell, some shell designs, some scalloping, and maybe you have some trim or ribbon or lace that you might want to put around the edge. So we're going to let it firm up, and then we'll do some decorating and finishing. So now that the pieces are dry, I'm going to show you how you finish both the Slump and the Hump bowl and plate. We started with the small bowl, and it was over top of this paper bowl, and it has now, it's dry, and it's also has shrunk quite a bit, and actually it's pretty dry to the point where I'm really not going to touch it anymore. It has a little bit of texture that's nice from the bowl and some lines where the creases are, and I like that. And then what I can do is do some surface decoration or a glazing technique on top of this to add more detail to a very simple form. And I had taken this out a day ago that it was not quite as dry, and I had just taken my sponge and smoothed along the edges. When you pick it up off the form, it's going to have a bit of a sharp or a raw edge, so you do need to take your fingers, compress the clay, a sponge, and just kind of wipe down anything that might be sharp or cause problems later on. So that is ready to be fired. And I'm just gonna keep it in the paper to support it for a while. And then this one is leather hard. It's not as dry, it's a little thicker. And this was the Slump. It was inside, and I had trimmed off the excess, and it's a pretty nice round circle. It's not perfect, but that's okay. I just used my needle tool. You can also use an X-Acto knife. There's also something called a fettling knife that is another knife that you can use. So I took my finger and the sponge and went around the outside rim, compressed the rim a little bit, and it's ready. This is also ready to be fired. Normally, if I can take the piece out before it's really dry, I may put on a design. I can use some prints, some stamps, and put some things down inside the bowl. Or when it's really wet, I can also put some decoration around the outside. But at this point, it's too dry. If I try to press on it, it'll crack and break. So one thing about the winter months is pieces will dry very quickly. This was actually in a plastic bag, but it's still dried. The paper plate will absorb a lot of the moisture. So that means when you take your form out, the paper will be wet and your clay will have dried quite a bit.